Red Hollow wasn't a town people found by accident. You had to be desperator, broken enough to look for it. Laura arrived just before sundown, the sky burning red, as if warning her she was crossing into something dangerous. The stagecoach didn't stop for long. The driver barely met her eyes as he tossed down her satchel and urged the horses forward, dust swallowing him whole. No goodbyes, no questions. That was how Red Hollow worked. The town stood crooked and tired, buildings leaning like men who'd lost the will to stand straight. Gunshots echoed somewhere distant, followed by laughter. No one flinched. No one rushed to help. There was no sheriff to run toward, no bell to ring for order. Laura tightened her grip on her bag. She had left behind a life she never wanted to speak of. Again a home that felt like a cage, a marriage built on fear, and a man who believed ownership was the same as love. She hadn't waited for justice. She'd learned the hard way that justice didn't always come for women like her. Red Hollow, for all its ugliness, promised one thing: no past. Inside the saloon, smoke curled thick in the air. Men crowded tables, voices low and sharp, eyes tracking her movements as she walked to the bar. Laura kept her head high, though her pulse thundered in her ears. "I need a room," she said, "and work." The bartender studied her, like he was measuring her worth in seconds. "You stay long, trouble'll find you." "I'm not afraid of trouble," Laura replied. From the far corner, Gideon watched. He'd been in Red Hollow long enough to recognize the look in her eyes. Not innocence. Not foolish bravery, but resolve, sharpened by survival. Gideon knew that look well. He wore it himself. When a drunken man stumbled into Laura's path and reached for her waist, Gideon was already moving. "Step away," Gideon said, his voice calm but firm. The man scoffed. "And who are you?" Gideon didn't answer. He didn't need to. Something in his stance balanced, ready-made. The drunk reconsider. He backed off with a curse. Laura turned to Gideon, meeting his gaze. "Thank you. Red Hollow eats people alive," Gideon said. "Best learn how to bite back." She gave a small, knowing smile. "I already have." As Gideon returned to his seat, he felt it a shift. Red Hollow didn't often offer beginnings. But sometimes, two people running from their pasts collided in the right place, and neither would leave unchanged. Laura learned quickly that Red Hollow never truly slept. Even in the quiet hours before dawn, footsteps echoed down the boardwalks. Laughter drifted from open windows, and arguments ended with gunshots, more often than apologies. Still, she stayed. Each morning, she woke in her small rented room at the boarding house, and reminded herself why. No one here asked where she came from, and no one cared why she flinched at raised voices. Work filled her days. She scrubbed floors, washed sheets stained with sweat and blood, and served drinks at night when the saloon grew loud and dangerous. Laura learned how to move through crowds without inviting attention, how to read moods in a room before trouble started. Survival had taught her those lessons long before Red Hollow ever could. Yet the past crept in when she least expected it. Sometimes it was the sound of a man's boots approaching too fast. Other times it was the smell of whiskey on someone's breath. In those moments, her hands shook, and her chest tightened as memories surfaced sharp words. Tighter grips, the helplessness she had sworn never to feel again. One night, after the saloon finally emptied, Laura stepped outside to breathe. The desert air was cool. Stars stretched endlessly above her. She leaned against a post, willing her heart to slow. "You look like someone carrying more than she lets on." She turned to see Gideon standing a few feet away, hat tipped low, hands relaxed at his sides. He wasn't watching her closely, giving her space, giving her choice. She noticed that. "Isn't everyone here?" Laura replied. Gideon nodded. "That's why they come." They stood in silence for a moment. Laura surprised herself by speaking again. "Does it ever stop the memories?" Gideon's jaw tightened. "No, but they get quieter if you don't let them decide your next step." Laura studied him. You talk like someone who knows. I do. She didn't press. Red Hollow ran on unasked questions. Over the next weeks, their paths crossed more often. Gideon escorted wagons out of town, broke up fights when fists replaced words, and kept to himself otherwise. Laura noticed he never started trouble, but he always finished it. There was restraint in him, a line he refused to cross, unless forced. One evening, Laura found him sitting alone, staring at a small metal object in his palm. A badge. He noticed her looking, and closed his fist around it. Old mistake. Or an old life, Laura said gently. Gideon met her eyes, surprised. After a pause, he slipped the badge back into his coat. Some lives don't deserve a second telling. Laura understood that better than he knew. As days passed, Red Hollow began to feel less like a hiding place and more like a crossroads. Laura wasn't just surviving anymore. She was choosing. Choosing when to speak, when to stand her ground, when to trust. And Gideon, though he fought it, felt something change too. He'd come to Red Hollow to disappear, to bury the man he'd once been. But Laura's presence made it harder to stay invisible. Two people haunted by what they'd done and what they'd failed to do found themselves walking the same fragile line. Neither realized that Red Hollow was about to force them to stop running. Trouble announced itself, the way it always did, in Red Hollow, loud, arrogant, and armed. The Caldwell brothers rode in just after noon. 6 men spread wide across the street, as if claiming the town by the sheer space they occupied. Their horses were well fed, their boots polished, their guns worn smooth from use. These weren't drifters looking for work. They were men who took what they wanted and dared anyone to stop them. Red Hollow went quiet. Laura watched from the saloon window as the brothers dismounted. Her stomach tightened. She had seen men like them before, men who mistook fear for respect. She stepped back, forcing her hands to remain steady as she wiped the counter. Gideon entered moments later. One look outside was all it took for his shoulders to stiffen. "Stay sharp," he murmured to Laura as he passed. "They're not here to drink." The Caldwell brothers made themselves comfortable, fast. They demanded whiskey, shoved patrons aside, laughed too loudly. When the saloon owner protested payment, one brother smashed a bottle against the bar just inches from his face. Laura kept her eyes down until one of them grabbed her wrist. "You're awful pretty for a place like this," he said, tightening his grip. Before fear could root itself in her chest, a shadow fell across them. "Let her go." Gideon's voice was low, controlled. The brother turned, sneering. "For what?" The answer came in motion. Gideon twisted the man's arm, forcing him to release Laura, and slammed him into a table. Chairs toppled, glass shattered. The saloon erupted into chaos. The fight was brutal and fast. Gideon moved with practiced precision, every strike deliberate. He disarmed one brother, dropped another with a clean punch, and put a third through the saloon doors. But numbers mattered, and the Caldwells weren't done. Guns were drawn. Laura ducked behind the bar, heart racing. She grabbed a revolver, hidden beneath the counter and used, but loaded. Her hands shook as she aimed not at a man, but at the floor between them. The shot cracked like thunder. "Muff," Laura shouted. The room froze. The Caldwell leader laughed slowly. "You've got spirit, girl. That'll get you killed." Gideon stepped in front of her. "Take your men and leave." "This town's ours now," the leader replied. "And you just made yourself a problem." The brothers backed out, dragging their injured with them, eyes promising blood. Silence followed. The saloon owner stared at Gideon. "They'll come back." Gideon nodded. He already knew. That night, Gideon packed his things. Red Hollow wasn't worth dying. Ferrand Laura certainly wasn't worth dragging into his past. He stepped outside, saddle ready. Laura met him there. "You're leaving," she said. "Yes." "They're not after the town," Laura said. "They're after you." Gideon didn't deny it. "Which is why I'm going." Laura stepped closer. "I didn't survive everything I did, just to hide again." Gideon met her gaze, seeing fire instead of fear. They won't stop. Then neither will we. For the first time in years. Gideon hesitated, not because he was afraid, but because staying meant choosing something. Choosing a stand. Choosing her. And Red Hollow was about to demand that choice in blood. Dawn broke over Red Hollow in a wash of pale gold. Too peaceful for what was coming. Gideon didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, cleaning his revolver with slow, careful movements. Across the room, Laura laced her boots, jaw set, hands steady. Neither spoke. Words felt too fragile for what the day demanded. By mid-morning, the town had noticed the tension. Doors closed, windows shuttered, shopkeepers whispered. No one asked Gideon to leave, but no one offered help, either. Red Hollow had survived by staying neutral. Standing meant risking everything. The Caldwell brothers returned just before noon. This time, they didn't ride in loud. They came organized, spreading out, cutting off exits. The message was clear: submit or burn. Gideon stepped into the street, alone. Laura watched from the saloon doorway, pulse pounding. She wanted to stand beside him, but Gideon had asked her to stay back. Not because he doubted her strength, but because he cared. The Caldwell leader smirked. Thought you'd run. Not anymore, Gideon replied. Gunfire exploded without warning. The street erupted into chaos. Bullets tore through wood and glass. Gideon moved fast, using barrels and hitching posts for cover. Returning fire with precise shots meant to disarm, not kill until killing became unavoidable. A scream cut through the noise. Laura, one of the brothers, had flanked the saloon. Gideon's heart slammed as he turned, firing as he ran. Laura stood her ground inside, revolver raised, face pale but determined. She fired once clean, controlled. The man dropped. When the smoke cleared, 2 Caldwell brothers lay dead, the rest fleeing into the desert. Silence followed, thick and stunned. People slowly emerged from hiding. Eyes turned to Gideon. For the first time, Red Hollow didn't look away. The saloon owner stepped forward. You saved us. Gideon shook his head. You saved yourselves by choosing not to hide. That afternoon, the town gathered. There was no badge to pin on Gideon, no law to write down, but an understanding formed. If Red Hollow was to survive, it needed something stronger than fear. Laura stood beside Gideon as plans were made. Night watches rules, spoken aloud instead of whispered. Not law, but agreement. Later, as the sun dipped low, Laura touched Gideon's arm. You could still leave. He looked at the town, the people who had finally stood, the place that had forced him to stop running. I already chose, he said. Laura smiled, warmth filling her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving a place. She was helping shape it. Red Hollow had been lawless. Now, it was becoming something else. Red Hollow didn't transform overnight. The gunfire had faded, but its echo lingered in every creaking board and shattered window. Still, something had changed. People walked the streets with their heads a little higher, spoke a little louder, and looked each other in the eye instead of at the ground. Gideon stayed. He helped organize night watches, taught men how to defend without provoking, and reminded them that strength meant restraint as much as force. He never called himself a sheriff, and no one asked him to. Titles didn't matter in a place that had lived too long without them. What mattered was presence, and Gideon was present. Flora became just as essential. She reopened the boarding house with clearer rules and firmer boundaries. Women who passed through Red Hollow found a rare thing: their safety. Laura didn't preach or pry, but she listened, and sometimes that was enough to give someone the courage to keep going. In quiet moments, Laura and Gideon talked about the past, not in detail, but in truth. They didn't excuse what had been done to them, or what they had done in return. They acknowledged it, set it down, and chose not to carry it forward. One evening, as the desert sky burned orange and purple, Gideon stood beside Laura on the saloon porch. This place was supposed to be the end of the road for me, he said. Somewhere to disappear. Laura leaned against him. Funny how it turned into a beginning. Gideon took her hand. I don't know what the future looks like. Neither do I, Laura said. But I know who I want to face it with. They didn't promise forever. They promised honesty. They promised to stand. In a town once ruled by fear, that was enough. Red Hollow would never be perfect. Violence still existed beyond its borders. The past still whispered at night, but within its limits, people chose something better. Because two broken souls had refused to remain broken. Love hadn't fixed the town. Choice had, and love had followed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.